All right, I think we'll get started. Tonight's special meeting of the Board of Education, and all board members are not present. Julie Bernick and Mary France are absent tonight, so I will be appointing Enrique Velasquez as clerk for tonight's meeting. And we'll move on to our purpose and agenda with Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Crosby. Tonight is a continued conversation through a work session for our ability to present information with you tonight around the budget. That's our sole topic, is to provide some updates around, I guess, kind of an iterative process that we've been having. And so thank you in advance for some of the Mondays that we've been adding to the schedule just to have good conversation and dialogue with the board. And so our purpose tonight is to get to a position where the board can support a direction moving forward with our intent to come back to the board next Monday for our preliminary budget for your consideration as well. So that's our purpose for tonight. And with that, can I just jump in? Okay.
That'd be great.
All right. So for about a month or so now, or more, we've been having conversations with the board as we've been following, obviously, the legislature and things happening at the state level. We've been sharing information with you all around our enrollment. We've been sharing information with the board around some of the feedback that we're hearing from our families. Most recently was our Exits Out survey with Morris Leatherman as well. And just generally throughout the year, having conversations around the academic needs, the mental health needs of our kids. And so we have to take all that into consideration as we come forward with making recommendations for a budget. And I would say a little over a month ago, or thereabouts, we came to you with conversations about some of our preliminary staffing, and as we're going into the staffing season, how we adjusted our timeline so that we could be more competitive. So thank you to Emily and her team and everyone else for really moving things around so that we could get out there sooner with vacant positions to have more of the competitive quality candidates. That was a direction that we were seeking from you all so that we could go down to the big Twin Cities job fair, knowing that we would be vying with not only folks locally, but literally from people from all over the country coming to this job fair, vying for teachers to pull them out of Minnesota. So we appreciate that support. And then several weeks ago, we came to the board as we talked as a senior team to identify the needs that are in our district that we felt that we needed to somehow get towards if we want to be a very competitive, viable entity and really begin to make critical investments to attract and retain families here in our district. And so we came to you with what we felt were our prioritized needs based upon all of those factors that I've just shared with you. And we've had a town hall around that as well. And just want to be clear again that those were the needs that we think would really help our students, really help this community, and really help revive, the district coming in a post-COVID, whatever you want to say, era in education. We also know that realistically, those needs come with some price tags that were challenging, given some of the financial realities that we have before us, and yet at the same time somewhat conflicted because with the price tags we still have needs. And how do we make investments that will actually attract folks into the district and meet the needs of our students so that we can start to grow enrollment? Again, we know enrollment doesn't just grow overnight. It takes time to kind of rebuild. First, with a lot of things that have happened here locally, that we're committed to restoring that process, but we want to make sure that we don't make reductions in areas that I think some of us who have been here longer can see we're paying the cost for some reductions that might have impacted our enrollment, and we can see that by some marked dates of where we started to see the trend of the slow enrollment decline. And so tonight we are coming back to the board with I guess, a reprioritization of the identified needs. And I want to be clear that the needs still exist in their totality. I think there are some ways that we're trying to meet some of those needs from an alternative approach. We are still finding that the needs for some of our student support programs, curricular programs, et cetera, are still there, and we may still have to come forward, with some ask of addressing the fund balance that exists to be able to support some of that. So what you see here tonight is reflected of that. I'll have Tammy walk through the revised sheet, but we want to make sure, again, that what we are committing to really is about an investment to really bolster our enrollment, knowing that we have families who have stated they are leaving our district because of academic programs, lack of one-to-one support or individualized support, and class sizes. And I think class sizes is one that is a significant shift, and as you heard Peter, class size isn't going from 28 to 25, it's going from like 28 to 15, and that's just not financially feasible. Knowing that to bring class sizes down by one is approximately $1 million. And reducing from 28 to 27 is not going to make a statistical difference in terms of the student experience. And so we are looking at addressing what we are hearing from those families as well. And I think tonight we'll also want to make sure that the board is clear on some terminology, specifically the terms of fund balance. And I want to make sure that we are talking the same language, both with the board and our community. And so I think we would like to solidify kind of what term will we use based upon how policy is written, so that when we talk about total fund balance, which is a composition of both assigned and unassigned, and how do we want to make sure that we're speaking to that so that you all are kind of staying in the conversation with us, and that our community is also with us, so that we don't appear to be trying to mislead anyone in this conversation, because that is definitely not the case at all. We have our senior team here tonight as well to talk about some of the changes in our reprioritization, both for what is going forward as well as some of the rationale for why we pulled back, or what are we alternatively looking to do to afford to maybe carry that priority forward from a different venue. And I think that is all that I have in terms of setting some opening context. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tammy.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, members of the board. The report that you have in front of you is an updated version of the one that we gave you last time. The dollar amount that for projected year end 22-23 didn't change. We're still right on track to be spending $111.9 million. And you'll see that next week at the board meeting when you see our financial statements. The contracted salary increases, we did reduce that by 5 FTE as we were looking at the exhaustive list that we got from Human Resources on all the vacant positions that haven't been filled all year that we were anticipating filling next year. There were 5 positions that actually were kind of double counted, so we adjusted that number. So the contracted salary increases, which includes the contract increases in the negotiations that we have settled, along with some assumptions of what we put in for the teacher's contract, which we haven't started negotiating. So that's where the $4.1 million comes from. And then the new investments, we just split those out. Those are the positions that on the March 28th board meeting we had discussed, and you gave us a thumbs up to get those so that we could have the job fair positions out there. There was a question on where the 3 elementary teachers were going, so I did that. We added 2 positions to Loyola Del Lago. We've had significant increase in open enrollment requests for Loyola Del Lago. And then we also added one for Jeffers Pond. And the rest of them were all the same as you saw last time.
Tammy, can I ask you a question about that?
Mhm.
So going back to the March 28th study session, I was under the understanding that we approved the probationary teachers for non-renew.
I believe that was also on the,
So I don't recall us approving this, and maybe I just missed it. I went back and I looked at that meeting. Can you help refresh my memory on that?
Yep.
Maybe I'm sure.
Yeah, we had conversations that night about the job fair coming up and positions that we were interested in going forward, so that we could be competitive on the front side of the hiring aspect. And I know there was a lot of conversation that evening, and then the next morning I sent you all a recap email as well, just to make sure that there was clarity, because the job fair was coming up that Thursday. So again, that's the process that we went forward. And again, it wasn't a vote, it was a thumbs that evening in terms of direction. So I guess that's the recap that
And
I
as I
gave.
recall it, it was, right, and as I recall it, you guys are gonna weigh in too, but as I recall it, it was around urgency of staffing and trying to get ahead of, the lack of candidates available out there.
Yeah, I remember the conversation. I just don't remember approving the additional teachers for Ola Del Lago and Jeffers Pond. So like I said, I remember the probationary teachers. I recall your email. I remember hiring the $5,000 for the ACT advisor, I believe it was. But I apologize, I just don't recall us speaking of this, so I'll have to go back and
so that dollar amount did not change. It was still the same as the previous report. And then the special ed, we kind of split those out. These were the positions that were given the thumbs up on the March 28th. The other ones we moved down to new investments under consideration. So that's kind of a breakout of the total positions that you saw last week. We just broke them out into what was given the thumbs up and then what we have under consideration. And then those 4 cultural liaisons, those were included in the achievement and integration that you guys had already approved on that one. So we put that in another other funding column just to kind of distinguish that out. Achievement and integration is part of the general fund, but because it's categorical funding, we just moved it over to the other funding category.
Tammy, can I ask a question? On the top paragraph that shows the 3 elementary students, it says 3 deans was the last part. And was the deans part of the achievement and integration funding as well?
No, nope, those are in the general fund.
Okay, because when.
Some of them are in there.
Some of them?
Yeah.
Okay, because, yeah, I remember the breakdown for the $800,000.
Yep, these are 3 new ones that were not included in the.
Okay, and then another question, kind of a broad question regarding, I know that and maybe this is Emily too, but I know that, there's teachers that are leaving throughout, there's teachers that are always leaving, people come, maybe support staff as well, there's people leaving, people being hired maybe. My question is, when listing these specific positions, are they already, or have we already hired for them? And have we taken into account the positions that people have left? And is that what these numbers reflect?
These numbers are all brand-new positions.
Okay. Does that make sense, that question? Just
Yeah.
with.
So to answer your question, yes, we have had some resignations and retirements for next year, and we will be working to hire those. But when looking at them based off of positions, those are positions that we currently have, so we're looking to rehire those. These are new positions that we are also looking to hire.
I'm wondering if we have a total number, and I know these are broken down, and I appreciate that, but I'm wondering if we have a total number projected, you know, hirees or employees next year, what we're hoping to have compared to what we currently have.
In terms of new hires or the FTE
Just
year-to-year
like
comparison?
how,
Year over change.
yeah,
Okay.
that would be great, thank you. Just given
In
like,
general, Amy, or is just by teachers or by?
just kind of in general, just because I know that there has been community concern regarding, you know, some of our neighboring districts and things that they've done as far as hiring and then now finding themselves in financial trouble. So just looking at, you know, how many we're looking to have positions filled next year compared to this year.
The next section, the new investments under consideration. The long list that you saw last time on this report included everything that all of the senior leaders had identified as being needed in their departments. We, last week, went back through that list and had some further conversation to see if there were things that we could kind of put on hold, or if there were other ways to address them at this point, or if they truly needed to be on this kind of high priority list for consideration. So the list that you see in front of you is the positions that have been identified as truly being needed for next year. And they include some of the special ed, some ECSE paras, and the 0.6 special ed teacher for Laker Online. They actually, that position currently, this current year is being funded with different funding source. So we have to put it back on the general fund. So that's why that position is on there. It exists now, it just doesn't have the funding that for next year. So that's why that one's on the list. The health aid floater position, we had a lot of conversation about that one. We initially had put it under investments on hold, and then further conversations, we decided that we needed to put that on there. But what we did to fund that was, last list we had 1.5 differentiation specialists. We reduced that to 1.0 so that we could add the health aid floater position back. And then the English learner positions, we can fund out of either Title III or the EL8. So again, we moved that into other funding. EL and Title III are, again, part of the general fund, but it says categorical funding, so we put it in the other funding category. And then we also kept the Assistant Director of Human Resources, given all of the legislative changes that are possibly occurring. It's going to put a huge burden on our Human Resources Department, and we all felt like that was a really important position to keep on there. And then the utility cost increases and transportation contract increases, those are a given. We don't really have a lot of choice in funding those. We've already been notified by the bus company it's going to be an increase, and we've all seen the utility cost increases. So given that list, our projected total expense needs drop down to $119.6 million. And our total projected revenues of $122.6 million. We've got the cross-subsidy aid at 3.1. Depending on how that ends up, the House version is a little less and the Senate version is a little more. So depending on where they're going to end up, hopefully in the next couple weeks, we can clarify that number. And then the English learner aid increase, that looks like it's going to be approved in both the House and the Senate. So that's included in there. So our budget shortfall, last time you saw this, we were at about 6.8 million. It's down to 3.8 million. And then the investments on hold at the bottom are the things that we just, as a senior leaders team, decided that we could postpone those or incorporate them into the work that's going to be done next year in those departments.
explain sorry, I'm on investments on hold. Year 3 of math curriculum,
Yeah, so.
how do you absorb that?
Well, so a couple of things. When we adopted the new math curriculum, we shared with you that the publisher is in the process of updating into a new version of the current curriculum. And what we didn't put into the total adoption was the cost of the newest version. And with us potentially being, in our, well, not potentially, we will be in our first year of implementation, so kind of our pilot year with the curriculum. And the question is, as we're still scaling our knowledge of this, how different will the new version be? And is that something that we could postpone and not adopt into next year? And so that we felt that that's something that we would just look at to use the current version versus going up into the newest version. Now, with that said, we are looking at the possible restricted rollover ability. So if we have any unused teaching and learning funds, can we roll that into a restricted fund account to account for updating the version of the curriculum, basically carrying over dollars just for that from unused dollars of the T&L budget this year. That's something that I know Dan and his team are considering right now, but the rationale for postponing is we felt that we'd still be in the scale-up learning modality, and there, could we justify going to the newest version while we're still building our capacity? So that's why we felt we could maybe delay that. At some point, there will be updates to the curriculum that will be more in response to student learning and their needs, and so we would have to consider it higher at that point, but right now, we feel we might be able to use the older version of the curriculum and not go into the new.
And that doesn't take away from any resources for the students or anything for operating under an older version?
They'll have all of the new, we'll adopt the new curriculum, and it's just like, going from edition 9 to edition 10.
Right.
The same core is still there. I don't know, and Dan, if there's any nuances that you can forecast, if any significant substantive change to instruction or their learning, or is it just light enhancements, and that's something I'll defer to Dan.
Yeah, what I'll say to that is, just as a reminder, and I think we shared this in our, back in April, the third edition won't even be available until the 24-25 school year. So
Okay.
the second edition is the only edition that's ready for 23-24 for next year. And we had engaged in a conversation with the vendor around whether we would want to do 1 year of the second edition or multiple years of the second edition. And we just feel at this stage of the game, given the points that Dr. Thomas just made, it makes sense to push that out. We are fully, the second edition is the one that we piloted this with those teachers who piloted, feel very strongly that it meets our needs. And part of it too, we'll get input from teachers implementing next year as well, in terms of whether they want a second year with the second edition before we adopt 3 years out. So that will give us that time too. So not concerned about any gaps. That's exactly what the edition we'll be adopting is exactly what our teachers were using and felt very strongly about this year in the pilot.
Okay, thank you for
I
explaining.
have another question while you're up here, Dr. Edwards.
Sure.
We had talked, I don't know if we talked in board meetings necessarily, but I feel like in other meetings we had talked about when our high school used to be a 7-period school, and that is something that is what's the word I'm looking for? It's something that increases the things that we're able to offer, and it may be something that could be attractive to potential people looking at our district. I'm wondering if we have run numbers on what that might look like, and if the senior leadership team has talked about possibly going back there. I know we're talking about how do we increase enrollment, and if we've looked at that further.
So we've talked as a team about that. We've not costed out that, and I don't recall, those of you who might have been here when we had that running. To your point, it definitely gives us an ability to enhance and offer a more robust curricular offering, particularly around the elective side, as well as have a solid advisory homeroom concept in the day and not be encroaching on instructional time. I don't know if you can dust off your memory what that might have been on the cut, because that was quite a while ago.
Yeah, it was over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to put you on the
Yeah.
spot.
No, that's all right.
No,
Yeah.
but ballpark, my recollection when we did that, we can go back and look, but I think we saved somewhere at the secondary level between $1.5 and $2 million when we made that.
And that was 10 years ago.
That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's my recollection of
Okay.
that dollar amount. I think it was around 1.6, 1.8, if memory serves me correctly.
Significant, yeah, it's not, yeah.
Yep.
And you might not know this either. I can definitely do my own research, but I'm wondering how many of, kind of similar type districts
Yeah.
offer the 7-period day.
Yeah, I haven't done any
Yeah.
real current research on that, but what I do know is that many have, there are not many left doing 7-period day.
Right.
For financial reasons.
And when we're looking at, I mean, maybe not right now, but looking to the future,
Theoretically, could be considered a competitive edge down the road.
Yeah.
It could be. I would also say there's been an appetite for high school redesign in the state of Minnesota for many, many years. And I think from my experience in COVID and how students interacted and learned, I foresee that conversation getting kind of a new life cycle for us to explore high school being more closer aligned to a higher ed model than a traditional K-12 model. In that, I don't want to jinx us, but if there's a notion in our state that essentially is making it hard to fund K-12 education, how's that for a good political way of saying something? I think many districts are going to find themselves in a real financial challenge. And I think it will foster some natural collaborations potentially. And so when you think about a system like St. Thomas, Hamlin, Concordia, Augsburg, they have this reciprocity within them. So you can be a Prior Lake student, but maybe you need this particular course and Shakopee's offering it. And so that student could actually enroll online or with that course, but still be a Prior Lake student. I think those are going to be the future high school redesign conversations in the state of Minnesota, given where I feel that funding seems to be going in ways that is doesn't look favorable long-term for K-12 in the state of Minnesota. Even though there's going to be, like I said, the touting of a deep investment, there's just a lot of things in that omnibus bill that I think is going to force a very different conversation for what does K-12 look like for the future generations.
Speaking of the omnibus bills, I have a question. Does the budget that we're looking at, for the numbers that you've run, does it include the 3 to 5 million that we originally talked about on the impact of some of these mandates that it could have in our district? Does it currently include the 3, like we had projected like 3 to 5 million?
Yeah.
So do these numbers include that?
This does not include unfunded legislative things that we are projecting. That would also tie back into our need or any district's need to kind of tap into any reserves. Do we have the capacity? The capacity is there, but still some unknowns on what that would look like.
So, I mean, my concern is we have declining enrollment. and not knowing what these mandates look like. And I'll be real honest with you, I know you said that we talked about this at the March 28th study session, but I went back to the April 17th study session, and these investments were all listed as new investments. And I remember every senior leader coming up and presenting their wish list. So I was not clear that we approved these, particularly the 3 deans, because now we're adding, with the A&I plan and this, we're adding 6.5 deans next year. Because we have 3.5 under the A&I plan, and we have 3 here.
I don't think the 3 under the A&I plan were new.
They weren't new, that's
They're
just where the
just
funding's
funded.
coming from,
Yeah.
for the current that we
Yeah,
already
so,
have.
okay,
So it'd be 3 new.
3
So,
new.
what makes
So
sense.
I guess I am a lot of concerns going out and increasing our budget by 10 million, knowing that, like I said, our enrollment's declining, and we don't know what these mandates are going to look like. And then I also want to bring up, can you help me understand, Chair Crosby, I'm looking at policy 701, which is our policy that it's the establishment, adoption, and modification of the school district budget. So I was doing some reading about our budget and our policy, and I went to, it's section 3, general statement of policy, under A, establishment and adoption of school district budget. Number 3,
Sorry.
that's okay. I can
It
read it.
just told me no internet.
Oh, okay.
But I'm gonna find it.
That's okay. So
Okay,
it
thank you.
says, prior to July 1st of each year, the school board shall approve and adopt its initial revenue and expenditure budgets for the next school year. The adopted expenditure budget document shall be considered the school board's expenditure authorization for that school year. No funds may be expended for any purpose in any school year prior to the adoption of the budget document which authorizes the expenditure for that year, or prior to the adoption of amendment to that budget document by the school board to authorize that expenditure for that year. So this is going back to, why would we authorize these positions to be added if it goes against our policy that we can't be putting these positions in place until after the budget is approved?
I think directionally, I mean, Dr. Thomas, obviously, feel free to weigh
So,
in,
yeah.
but the intent was to get ahead of the staffing shortage. And knowing that we already had so many empty positions as well, that let's get moving on these, and we've got more empty positions than we can fill. We aren't doing a final approval on our budget until June 12th. Yeah,
Right.
so we will continue to stay nimble, especially in what you talk about the, I think, can't remember if it was 3 to 5 million, but I trust that you do.
Yeah, I can share it with you.
But I remember that it was 2% of the 4%, right? That's kind of the understanding. And so, I mean, we can't move forward. We can plan. We can be planful, but we aren't approving a budget till June 12th. And we can't start planning June 11th. You know, that's the way I look at it, but if you want to.
Yeah, every district goes through the process, particularly around the staffing components, well in advance of adopting a final budget. We don't have districts approve final budgets and then go into the staffing protocol. Staffing is happening prior to the final votes of budgets, unless you know of a district that does it differently. The staffing season happens in the spring. Everyone's getting hired, contracts are shifting around, all of that, and so boards are providing guidance and direction, like, yep, this is a direction that we can support, continue into that direction. The final budget, and again, the boards also take that into account of, we know that this is a direction that we are supporting, so we anticipate this will be part of our final budget. So we're giving that directional support to continue. June 12th is the final vote of the budget, and those are the assumptions that we continue to carry forward. Can I add to that at all, or is that pretty?
Yeah, that's,
Well, can you help, and I appreciate that, can you help direct me in the March 28th board book where we would have seen these positions to be approved? Because I just am not finding it. And I'm not trying to be difficult, I just don't remember the conversation. I do remember the email that we received, but that wouldn't serve as an approval to move forward with $3 million worth of positions to be approved.
And I wasn't at that meeting. I did listen to it,
Although, I gotta go back.
but I did listen to it, and directionally, I think it was pretty clear. And again, in the staffing environment that we're in, I think if we were in an environment where it was easy to find qualified staff, particularly for some of these positions like deans and psychologists and special ed, I think if those were easily staffed, we wouldn't have to worry about being quite as directional and working ahead. But if we want to move forward with those types of supports, we have to get on it. And especially knowing, I mean, how many staff are we, I don't even want to put you on the spot, Emily, but we've got a lot of staff we haven't hired for
Well,
this year. in open
See, I was under the
positions.
understanding that we were giving direction to move forward with all the probationary teachers for non-renew, that those were the ones that we looked at, and we said that these were positions that, even though they're not non-renewed, they would apply back for their position, many of them, was, I believe, I remember the conversation.
That's a common thing, yeah.
Yeah, so, but what I don't remember is adding all these positions, particularly the deans. That's the one that stuck out to me the most, because I don't remember having a conversation about the deans. And then also like the Laker Online teacher, we just talked about that in the April
Yeah,
meeting.
so,
So I apologize, I'm not trying
That's
to
okay.
be,
No, that's all right, that's
cause
all
any
right.
trouble. I just want to be transparent
yeah, it was
about
the
if we're adding
scenarios.
$3 million
It
worth
was
of
these,
positions.
it was these, correct?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so, in the various budget scenarios, we talked about the changes to our general fund balance, based upon, increases and then how that would potentially impact the general fund.
Is this piece of paper?
It's in there, and so that was where the whole conversation around a variety of different positions took place, and there was a lot going on that night, a lot of conversation that night about what would be in certain scenarios. And so, again, the recap email that I sent to you all the next morning, again, just for clarifying, just talked about making certified staff investments as we believe are necessary to supporting our needs, varying from classroom teachers, SPED, deans, et cetera. We also, just kind of walk through kind of broad categories, just to recap, because I knew we were there late as well. And so I know my brain was fried and I processed all night long. And I just said, please reach back out. We also had acceptance by exception that night. It actually wasn't thumbs. It was, is there anyone not okay moving forward in this direction? And so that's how we did it. So I captured that as well. So that's
The other thing I
the
want
best
to,
recap.
yeah, and the other thing I want
that
to
I
touch
can-
on just directly as a board, because I've been part of when we're looking at cuts, right? And we were sitting and are sitting on a very high, healthy fund balance this year because of being short-staffed was a big piece of it. So directionally, logically, if we've been sitting on a low fund balance as a board, we wouldn't be saying move ahead with staffing, from kind of a logical global perspective. I just want to add that.
Yeah, and I'm mindful of that, and even with that, if I may just add to that, the tactic isn't to just spend away the fund balance. It's there as a reserve, for critical situations, and again, we have to find a way. I don't know how else to say this, but part of our challenge is how do we ensure that we are providing that individualized support, responding to the needs of our students academically, the mental health, et cetera, knowing that many of our ratios are on the high end for classrooms. I think we might be in the bottom third or the bottom 3 districts in terms of class sizes, and stay competitive to attract families to come and or stay in our district. And it's very clear, I would love the dilemma to not have to think about how do we find 1,000 or how do we convince 1,000 of our families to come back. I would love the opportunity for them to just always be choosing us. Now, we won't ever get 100% of a market share. I know that, but can we get a significant amount of those families back? And part of what we believe are some of the needs that we are learning about is we're trying to fill some of those needs in some of these budget conversations. And I'm mindful that also that we want to be careful not to put so much into the district and find ourselves in this perpetual cycle of like boomeranging and going back and forth with invest it, cut it, invest it, cut it. I don't know if our current structure and offerings is, you know, if it's not for balancing with some of our open enrollment, how do we make up for that loss? What will attract families to stay here is what we're trying to solve for. And offer that high quality educational experience for our kids.
Well, Dr. Thomas, I would love to have a board conversation about those micro issues, because I think there are micro issues within our district, but I don't think it's appropriate for the board table here this evening. Can you help me understand, so if we are declining enrollment and, or projecting enrollment to be, well, pretty much like flat, I believe, to last year, but now we've added these additional positions, we should naturally have lower class sizes, correct? I mean, we've added the positions. So the reason I think about this is because when I looked at this, one of my questions tonight is with, I'm sorry, excuse me for a second here. With the Ola Delago, it was the 100 kindergarten kids come in, correct? Yeah, so that's where we needed to add the Ola Delago teachers, correct? But if our enrollment for kindergarten is flat, then there's going to be another building that potentially is not going to have as many students in their classroom. So wouldn't you just shift the teachers? So if you have flat kindergarten enrollment, are you following me on that?
Well, yeah, a little bit.
You know, someone.
It's a little trickier at Loyola.
Yeah, with
The
this.
Spanish
Well, I
version.
understand it, but you understand what I'm saying? So if we have flat enrollment, you're gonna have smaller class sizes. If we've added all these positions.
We have targets we work towards, you know,
Yeah,
so
I
the
understand.
targets will probably be a little bit lower, I would imagine, unless we can up enrollment a little, given the supports. With Loyola, the example you use, I mean, I think it's totally right. We're gonna target the best we can and move staff around appropriately, but for Loyola, that's a specialized need, you know.
No, I understand that, but then do
Can
you
I speak
lose
to
one
that
at
quickly?
Jeffers Pond, or do you lose one at another school where you don't have,
Sure.
where you have declining enrollment? Or you don't have the enrollment that you had last year?
So we did move around a lot of other sections as well. So there are some sections where like 5th grade got cut a section, but 4th grade went up a section. Or 1st grade got cut a section and 2nd grade went down a section. So that's just the overall adds, but there are a lot of other movements that happen throughout all of them. And with our class size targets and our class size discussions, there's a lot of times where the numbers just fall perfectly where you can't cut, because then you're gonna go way over your discussion cap or your targets. But you also then are having significant smaller class sizes for that 1 year, because the kids don't come to us in these prepackaged numbers that make it fit perfectly, where they're all at 22 or they're all at 24 or something like that. So it really depends on the shifts and the movements, but there were some grade levels that received a cut in their section versus others that increased. The overall addition was 3.0. But there were other movements that did occur.
I appreciate you explaining that. And so for like another example, I'm looking at like the high school numbers, and the high school numbers are projected to be down, and I know we've seen declining enrollment in the high school, but we're adding 2 high school teachers. So that's where I was hoping to get some clarification of like, what's the position filling? Where are we looking to add that position where we're seeing declining enrollment, where naturally your class sizes are gonna get smaller if you have declining enrollment within the high school?
I can find the breakdown of where the additional FTEs went into, but again, it ended up with those class sizes that were just perfectly too high, but if you didn't cut, then it would be down to the 15. So it's really adding like a 0.2 in English and a 0.2 in art or whatever that may be. Those were hypothetical, those weren't real numbers. I can get you where those actual FTEs went to.
To keep us at our.
Of the
Right.
at that 2.0, and again, a lot of that was kind of plugging holes in sections. Not like we're gonna have a 1.0 FTE teaching biology. It's not staff like that. The only one that's more pure like that, Director Atkinson, is the Laker Online teacher. And that's coming from federal stimulus funding back to the general fund.
And then also the deans. Like I said, I was not aware that these were already approved, so I actually had a lot of questions around these positions tonight. So the deans, where would the deans be filled into?
So currently, right now, well, at the start of the school year, our elementary schools all had a 0.5 dean, and the middle school shared a dean, so they each had a 0.5 dean. That we brought forward to the board, and I apologize, I can't remember which board meeting it was, but we brought forward to the board a request to add a 0.5 dean to all of our elementary schools that had center-based programming to bring them up to a 1.0 dean. So one of the 0.5 is to bring Jeffers Pond up to a 1.0 because we're adding a center-based program to Jeffers Pond next year. So that's one of the 0.5s of the 3.0. Another 1.0 is adding a 0.5 to Ola del Lago and a 0.5 to Westwood/Sage, because with Ola del Lago being emergent school and Sage, or Westview having Sage, the student needs and the behavioral supports we felt use of analysis was similar to the center-based programming. And so bringing all of our elementary schools up to having a 1.0 dean that'd be available to help all of our students and the student behaviors and needs that need to be addressed in all the elementaries. And at the same time, also bringing up our middle schools to have a 1.0 dean. So adding the 0.5 to Twin Oaks and the 0.5 to Hidden Oaks so that they can each have their 1.0 dean.
And deans serve a broad purpose, but climate culture of a school and overall safety as well for our campuses. As you've heard us talk, throughout this year, the levels of dysregulated behaviors and some of the behaviors that we're seeing, are intensified as folks are trying to reacclimate into this space. I will say deans are heavily leveraged in terms of supporting that overall safety for our campuses in conjunction with other staff as well, but that's a primary area of student engagement, climate culture, and safety.
Were any of those dean positions, or am I remembering this wrong, also previously covered by COVID dollars, or were those the A&I? No, am I remembering that wrong?
I don't,
Okay.
yeah,
Counselors.
counselors were the ones that were floated on ESSER funds,
Thank you.
which is the ask here, reinstating the counselors and having them at each grade level for the middle school, which again, to your point, Director Bolan, of.
Not grade level, each building.
What's that?
Counselors.
In the middle school,
Oh,
to have
sorry.
a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade
Okay,
counselor.
sorry.
Just the ratios we have some of the highest in the state in our district. So that is, again, something we used to have going back 7-10 years ago. So we're reinstating something that was cut because of budget concerns, but I think some unintended consequences, particularly given some of the challenges that have gone on for the past few years with the pandemic, has really heightened the ratio issues that we've been trying to piecemeal together for the past several years, many years actually.
Understanding that discipline is a factor throughout all the grade levels, I'm wondering what other, besides the looking at adding deans and support in that way, I'm wondering what other conversations are around as far as just plain student accountability, the support from the current administration to the current teachers. I'm just wondering what kind of conversations.
Yeah, I would say that these positions would really help us accelerate the development of our multi-tiered systems of support. You'll hear the acronym MTSS. This allows for students who have varying needs to be able to get a scaffolded approach to how they manage their levels of engagement. And so whether it's through our positive behavior intervention support systems, our responsive classroom programs at the elementary level, you know, second step curriculum as well. These staff members are critically tied to supporting and like co-teaching some of that for our students to give the skill sets necessary for our kids to make better decisions more proactively. So this is a proactive investment so that we can also mitigate the surge, if I could use that word loosely, of special education referrals that we're seeing in our district. Significant increases there. And so can we do something more on that proactive side, preventative side, so that we can pull back some of the special ed need that you also see here as well. That's part of the plan, is funding it on the front so that we're not paying more on the backside. And again, students have special education needs that will be identified. We will support that. I don't want to say we won't, but are we finding ourselves in a position where we could probably mitigate some of that on the front side? So I think that's where we can see these positions being more proactive, curricular as well as direct student support. And then the accountability, you know, you asked about administration, and again, schools have a variety of progressive discipline systems where we work with students at the lowest level possible to solve issues, but then all the way up to suspensions, detentions, and even an expulsion if it's a significant issue. So we have that continuum of support in all of our campuses. And I want to make a point of clarification here, and I've heard Director Atkinson say that say this, and I just want to be clear that, you know, not recalling approving, you know, these positions, and again, there wasn't an approval. This budget was not approved, and I know it's semantics, but I just want to make sure that, you know, again, going back to the fund balance conversation, there was a support of direction to continue in this direction, but not an approval of positions yet. I just want to make sure that we're
I appreciate that clarification, because in looking back, well, in our discussion tonight, just looking back to the email, and I think that the thumbs up, I understood it to be that was just kind of approving for you to do the work to get us those numbers around that. I do echo Director Atkinson's concern regarding the new hires, especially when we're talking about unfunded mandates that we didn't account for. All of those things, I know that there's a balance between being proactive and doing the things that we need to do, but there's also that it's just a balance, and it's challenging given we don't have the numbers from, you know, what's all coming through on that. I don't know, you know, if I were to say, you know, a desire or that, you know, we hope that when we're looking at these things, this is a study session to not to approve, but also to offer, you know, where we're concerned and open up the conversation. You know, I'm wondering what it looks like, given the fact that the 3 million in what the mandates might look like for our district. If those all come through the way that we kind of projected them coming through, would that would create the budget shortfall back up to the 6.8 million or 7 point something million. And I think, you know, that's rightfully a place for concern. It's, you know, I just find it, I'm gonna guess that every year at this time, we're gonna be looking at like, oh my goodness, especially when nothing is concrete. But look, given, you know, what Lakeville's going through and all of that, and not wanting to end up in that kind of position here, it's hard to direct. Yeah, it's just.
There are some things that the legislature has taken off of the table. There was a couple amendments, the class size is no longer in there, the minimum wage, the health plan. So I think those have all been taken off. So the one that's still sitting out there is the unemployment.
And that was going through, they were talking about that today.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll know about that soon. The vote on this budget is scheduled to take place on when?
June 12th.
Final vote
Final.
is June 12th.
And have you heard about the prep time? Has that been decided? Because that was a $2.2 million projected expense toward the teacher prep time.
That also came off.
Oh, that came off as well? Okay.
So it's unemployment and it's, and then any things tied to the,
Oh, it's Family Leave Act, I believe, that one as well.
you're gonna have the language, Emily.
I'm not sure what you're referring
Sorry.
to, but
Still on
I
the
think
table.
TRA, changes to TRA are still on the table as well.
Mhm.
And we're still not quite sure where they're gonna end on anything that they're adding to PELRA with the requirement for negotiations.
That's
Mhm.
what I was referring to, yeah. But, so it's
Not
not
as-
nearly what we thought it was.
Well, that's
which
good.
is
Yeah,
good.
which is
Yeah.
That is very
Making
good.
progress.
Mhm.
But still some unknowns that
Yeah.
are legitimate
Very-
concerns,
very
which
much
will
so,
be
yeah.
part of our conversation moving forward, for sure.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear with the board tonight, you know, again, we're not trying to railroad this thing into a decision. And definitely respect your perspectives. We share a lot of that.
Yeah.
You know, we're conflicted, quite honestly, as a team. This exercise, even as a senior team, to say, you know what, I don't want to move that forward as a identified need. That was a hard conversation for us to have. Like I say, it's choosing between good and good for kids. And so I want to be clear, our staff is not trying to say this is the be-all, end-all, but we also want to be very transparent with the board and what we are seeing and our daily lived experiences in the district, juxtaposed to what I think, you know, several of you have brought up tonight, some financial unknowns, and nor do we want to be running this district into the hole, you know, into the negative. That is definitely not our goal. We are really trying to bolster our offerings and our stance to be a very attractive place for families to choose, to start that uptick of our enrollments. We can get out of this flat. And there are some micro things. I would say there's probably some macro things that we can do too. So it's a combination of both that we can help kind of the bottom line, which is our enrollment, that really can help drive.
Well, and one of the things, and I think I mentioned this in our last meeting, is I would love to see you go back and review our current expenses and see where we can create efficiencies.
Mhm.
Because if we're in a situation where we have declining enrollment, and I know, I've seen it in our district, I know there's things that we need to do to add, particularly like the paras and the support with our deans. But then, how do we create efficiencies? And, you know, could we find $1 million that we could currently cut? I know it's incredibly hard to cut positions. It's hard to cut people. And it's really hard to cut people when we hire these new people. And if in 2 to 3 years, we are cutting into fund balance, we don't want to go back and cut people.
Well,
And so is there any way we can go back and find $1 million of how we're currently spending money? Maybe there's some efficiencies that we can look at that we.
yeah, I
Can
can,
address.
yeah, I'll speak generally, and I'll invite any of my colleagues to come forward on this. Here's just my wonder for that. When we cut people, we cut programs. So we went through this exercise roughly 10 years or so ago. And when I started looking at some of those enrollment figures, we could start seeing the marked difference of enrollment changes when we started making those cuts. Question is, did we cut the wrong things? We cut what we felt we needed to or that we could at that time. Okay, so people made decisions that they, really tough ones. Could we find $1 million somewhere? Generally, I would say in a budget of our size, we could find $1 million. The big question is, what will the true cost of that be? Will that $1 million save the financial bottom line that we know of today? And then because that program was cut, we now lose the enrollment. And so it's not $1 million, it's actually more than $1 million. So that's the question. And I think, you know, when we talked as a team, going back to the 7-period day, very costly to run. There was a dollar figure associated with that, but there was a compounded effect on what we're seeing 7-10 years later still on that reduction. So, so I hear you, Director Atkinson, and if any of my team want to weigh in, because they've been through this exercise and they've heard me ask, where do we absolutely need to continue to move forward? What can you pull back, you know, from your coffers? Not to put Marcus and his team on the spot, but one of the things that they were going for was the enhancement of the IT. And for us to pull that back, we could support the older generation platforms that we currently have for another year or so. But when those begin to fail, because we know how technology works, it's time to fail when, you know, so you can keep buying. We will have to buy newer units. Those newer units, a year, 2 years from now, will be more costly. And we'll have to buy the latest gen, which we're trying to get away from right now, because we could get by with 8th and 9th generation. So again, we could save it now, and we are. But when the need arises for new technology, that refresh rate is going to come with a higher price tag over time. And so what's the net savings? Is it truly $1 million? And we're just using that as just a spitball figure here. But so we still can, to Director Atkinson's point, we can go back as a team. And we will continue this exercise as a team to get us to a place that is comfortable, that the board could support. I just want to be mindful of there are second and third order effects for every decision that we make.
The other thing is, if you don't mind,
No, go ahead.
Director Milligan, the other thing I would mention is, in some ways, I think you both are saying the same things. You're a little more in real time, and you're probably a little looking at it longer term, but you were talking about budgets driving high school redesign in Minnesota. And that's and creating efficiencies and creating creative solutions that are less costly but do not have that negative impact, right? Like that's what we're really trying to find. And I just want to call that out because I think we have a lot of creative minds in this district that can do that. It's probably going to take more time and a little longer term vision, but I think we can get there and maybe be cutting edge on it too.
One of the things that I was going to mention is, Dr. Thomas, you mentioned even back when, you know, prior to you coming and when we went through the time where we cut programs. I'm wondering what our current list of programs are. And I know that might be exhaustive and maybe unrealistic for me to even ask it. Maybe a picture could be painted for me. One of the things I think about often, and maybe it was, you know, listening to teachers during COVID, and that was challenging for everybody, but and we've talked about this before in various meetings where it's like wondering, I'm just curious, if we really laid out, you know, kind of just had that where you lay everything out, this is all the things that we're doing, and maybe every program I'm sure it has its purpose, but, you know, that's kind of something that I'm curious about. Like, how many programs do we have, and what are the dollar amounts attached to them? And, you know, I think that picture, you already may have it coming new, you know, being new, coming into the district and kind of taking a broad look at everything. You might kind of have a better feel for, and maybe Dr. Edwards too, like, you know, this is just, you know, for our curriculum and all of the different, you know, maybe everything we have is viable and needed, but I'm just curious, you know, in the discussion with is there $1 million we could find? You know, I think the diligence, and I'm gonna assume you've gone through it being, you know, this is your first year. I'm gonna assume that you've gone through it, but I think the diligence and sharing that to the public, I mean, it just fosters a spirit of trust.
Yeah, this is actually part of the dashboard conversation. When we have this, we will categorize every department so you can see what is the spend,
Okay.
you know,
Yes.
by the various programs within each department. So yes, that data does exist.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things, and then some of them are kind of correlated to that, or they might cross multiple departments because you need the IT infrastructure to support this particular curriculum, right? So there's those kind of things that happen. But yes, that is something that we will be flipping forward. So, and that's for the departments as well as for our schools, so that the public can see, you know, how are the dollars being spent, where are they being spent? And then when we have conversations, like I said, you know, we came back roughly 50% lower than when we initially identified them. And again, that initial pass, just to be very clear again, was just to almost paint the priority vision. Like, this is what we really believe, this, you know, and again, I want to be careful on terms. This wasn't a wish list. This was what we are saying is, these are needs that we are hearing from our staff and our students' experiences that we believe will help. Now, with that, we know that we should not afford everything. So can we come back and do another pass at this to say, okay, let's really start grinding and getting in going. We can find efficiencies. I just want to be clear, we'll want to make sure that we're okay with, I think, some of the impacts that some of this might have. With some of the fixed costs, obviously they're fixed. Some of the FTE that we've been supported with guidance to go forward, you know, those have been out there. They haven't been filled. Not all of them have been filled. So the question is, do any of those get pulled back? And again, that's a conversation we can have. We just need to see what impact that would potentially have on, you know, special ed, for example, which is maybe more fixed than not. And maybe that's not where we look. We look at the other areas that we're, you know, staffing as well. So,
Dr. Thomas, could I?
yeah, please, and any of the team, please, there's plenty of table, room at the table.
Yeah, how about I just take this? Just want to provide just a little additional perspective around some of the conversations. You know, you bring up the costing, for example. We have some programs that we deem specialized in nature. And I would name a few of them right here, at the risk of missing out on any, but our MinCAPS program, for example, our SAGE program, for example, our Spanish immersion program, 3 concrete examples, there might be others. Specifically talking about the MinCAPS program for a moment, and by no means am I making suggestions, and I'm being very cautious in my word choice here, but that's a great program, and it's not as efficient from a staffing perspective as our traditional high school classes. So when we talk about class size and we talk about, you know, we have a calculation per FTE per class size, and that program is less cost effective than the traditional high school English class or social studies or science or math. However, it certainly is a program that brings great value to our students and to our community and our families. And so I think that's one of the things that we want to be cautious when we engage in this, in looking at those types of things. Another example, and you know, part of this needs that we've identified through our review process of our Gifted and Talented / SAGE program review is the differentiation specialist that we brought forward. That's been a gap, quite frankly, for a number of years since those positions in their former
Which is the
iteration.
Synergy program,
Yep.
correct?
Yep, and that's been a gap, and been a gap that we've been known exists, but we didn't commit the resources. And the term I'd like to throw at this conversation that has been used previously, I know, I haven't heard it here mentioned tonight, but investment. You know, we've kind of talked around investment, bringing back students, but I think that that is, and I made mention of it, a competitive edge when I was talking about the 6-period or 7-period day. And within that, we have to remind ourselves as well that you are all well aware, and I don't mean to repeat something that we're all aware of, but I think it is important to be on the table that we continue to educate our students. I don't know what the current number is, but I know what the number was when we went out for a referendum last fall, at $2,000 on average, less than the 7-county metro area. So, like, efficiencies, bang for the buck, whatever term you want to throw at it, it currently exists in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools, has historically existed in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools, and you know, having conversation around the fund balance. Certainly, we have, that fund balance has been built up for in a variety of ways. And I think what we, as senior leaders, are bringing forward, if I may, is investments in what we believe are important expenditures to keep us competitive, to keep us in the game, and arguably advance us in that game that we all are participating in from an enrollment perspective. So those were just a couple of additional thoughts I wanted to add to the conversation.
I have a couple questions. So I've heard the term that we educate for less on the board table year after year after year. And while I recognize that and appreciate that, we also have better scores than a district like Minneapolis that spends 18, correct me, it's like
Significantly.
significantly more.
Yep.
So that doesn't always equate in academics. The spend is not always equated in
Agreed.
academics. There's a lot of different factors.
Agreed.
And at the end of the day, we're here to educate our students. Secondly, can you help to provide more information for me on the MinCaps program and why it is off-site versus integrated into our own building? And I know I believe we share it with like Lakeville or something like that.
Farmington, yep.
Oh, Farmington, okay, Farmington. But can you help me understand that? And
Yeah, from a programmatic standpoint, part of it is to provide exposure and opportunity for students to have a different experience in their day. It creates a very different structure for students to experience and creates greater flexibility with the programming that is provided. And it's generally speaking the type of programming in that type of delivery model that exists in other districts where that exists. Generally speaking, those are off-site for a variety of reasons, and that's what our model is premised around.
The last thing I'll say for Michelle, you want to say a few words, again, going back to the investments that we have made to draw, you know, La Ola del Lago is a great example of a niche program that attracts enrollment. And if we can get them at kindergarten, like we're seeing, like we have them for life, so to speak. And so I just want to make sure that where we divest that it doesn't impact, like, that's the potential that I want to make sure that we are mindful of. That, you know, the MinCAPS enrollment as well, that has been growing. These are two areas that maybe aren't the most efficient because of the specialty of their core nature framework, but they seem to also be garnering the enrollment. So it comes with the cost. I mean, growing comes with the cost. And what we ultimately plan for is that our growth continues to accelerate and compound, you know, year after year. So, sorry, Michelle.
No, I agree with everything that Dr. Edwards said, as well as Dr. Thomas. And you know, as I'm listening and talking about efficiencies, you know, I'm coming from other districts, and I gotta tell you, Prior Lake has more efficiencies than I've ever seen. And I think that comes with having to cut and cut and cut to get as efficient as possible to keep the resources in front of students. And I think we've hit a point where if we're gonna keep these resources in front of students, you know, with the increased cost to even do that, we are going to have to make some investments. And as the Director of Student Support Services, you know, I hear staff calling me constantly, like, the needs of the students are so much greater. I can't tell you exactly why. It could be COVID, it could be society, it could be a million reasons that we maybe aren't going to be able to put our finger on. But mental health, behavior, all of those things are increasing in our students. And if we don't try to get some proactive pieces in place to help the students learn the skills so they can be accountable for their behavior, they can be accountable to be in school and do the work, we're never gonna get there. We're just gonna keep, you know, running the hamster wheel because we're not putting the investments in front of our kids that we need. So when I think about the deans that can be there, and, you know, it's not just to help discipline and behavior, it's also there to take those lagging skills and say, you know, and take that time. So why did you make that choice? What can we do next time? Versus trying right now at a halftime dean to just kind of cycling them through, doing the absolute best they can. But what they're saying is we can't do what we need to do for kids. So I have to reiterate that, you know, these things aren't wish lists. These are like, we're feeling fire that this is what we need in order to help our kids move forward. So I just had to come say that because I take the calls. I'm dealing with the staff that are really feeling the pinch of not being able to meet the needs of kids. And if we can't meet the needs of kids, then families may continue to go other places where they feel like their kids' needs can be met.
Can I piggyback off of what Michelle is saying as well? I think we've talked a lot about retaining our families and our students. From my perspective, we also have to be very cautious about retaining our staff. We have a completely new staffing environment over the last 3 years that we haven't experienced in a long time. And not only if we do divestments, if we try to get even more efficient than we already are, I am highly, highly concerned about how many staff we're going to continue to lose. Staff of all of our positions can easily go find a position elsewhere. And if we don't provide them the supports that they have been begging us for, I have significant concerns that we're gonna have even more of a staffing problem than we currently do.
And I want to piggyback on Michelle's comments there. Certainly, she is a director of student support services. My role as director of teaching and learning and supporting all of our buildings, see that many times over, to the point of what our sites need in terms of the level of support. And I believe we really, when we came forward and we went through this process to bring what's here tonight, we first and foremost looked at the sites. First and foremost looked at where do we need to, again, invest so that we can better meet the needs of our students and better meet the needs of our staff and supporting those students. And we had many conversations as a senior leadership team about that and brought those forward first and foremost. And then went back and said, okay, what can we do in refining and prioritizing those needs and making decisions that are the greatest need, because they're all, as Dr. Thomas has said many times, choosing between good and good. And I believe that the process we went through to bring what we've got here for your digestion and consideration is a lot of iterations of that conversation.
And Dr. Edwards, I appreciate that. And I think the only reason I'm asking for this is because in the last 6 months, I've seen some spends, and whether it's new board chairs, in the chairs that we're sitting in, or new TVs and admin's offices, those are the kinds of expenses I'm talking about. I am not talking about supporting our students or our teachers. I'm talking about taking a fine-tooth comb and going through maybe where we've spent in the past, looking forward. Can we make those type of cuts that are not necessary in our district?
I have a question for Jim.
Jim, I'll switch spots with you.
And while he, thank you, both of you, and while he's coming up here, I look at our fund balance, and I know I'm being very simplistic in saying this, but I look at the fund balance and realizing we've got some money there. And I know that we've also got a policy in place that we can't dip below a certain amount, which I think is responsible. But there's funds in there that I just can't help but think and look at these things where we put things on hold, yet we could fund them. And I'm looking, Jim, at you for the emergency preparedness and response program needs. And I know from our last meeting, that was more resources to help our security coordinator, right?
Correct.
Primarily?
Good evening, everyone. Yes, it is primarily, however, the whole department, operations, health and safety, LTFM, and now emergency preparedness.
Right. So I'm looking at, can you, again, not to put you on the spot, Jim, but I guess putting you on the spot, Jim. Looking at that and getting the emails, getting the phone calls from people in our district about the safety of our district. When we put something on hold, can you give me an example or two or three of what we're putting on hold?
So, thank you. One of the things are the supports we asked for are some startup costs for that department, or the new focus within our department. And it's cameras, it's card access, it's office help, administrative assistant. And those are all things we can overcome. We can shift funding from dedicated funding for safety. We can look at capital dollars to support that like we always have. Not ideal, and it competes with other things then, but we certainly can make that work. And then the administrative help, now's not the time to ask based on our list, but at some point in the future it would be necessary to have that kind of support. I think exactly, excuse me, like Emily was talking about, we're at saturation right now. We have Jody in our office, primarily transportation. So all of the other administrative duties that come with those other departments are Maureen Mullen and me. And again, we can certainly get through that. It's going to slow down our work. We have to make decisions based on all of the departments, but safety will not suffer.
For instance, like with your budget, you said that you can shift dollars. So is there a way to go back and shift, if cameras on special education vehicles, which I know are important, re-looking at your budget and finding what can you move dollars around to make sure that we have that in place? I think that's kind of what we're asking for, you know what I mean?
That's kind of what we're doing. We have capital dollars, and Tammy, you can help me with that definition, but we have dedicated funding for capital. That's based on student counts.
There are, the money that we get is based on the ADMs and building ages. But it's in legislature, a very specific list of things that you can spend it on. And it's more things that you would typically depreciate. So it's permanent things that could be a vehicle.
Like board chairs. That's where that money came from, was capital.
So, and that's an important distinction, again, for those in our community who may dial in or listen to this too. capital is used for capital and only capital. And so, you know, if you want us to enhance the SAGE program and we've got all this capital money, well, why can't we can't. So I just want to be very clear about that. But we are also getting creative. So with the cameras, for example, we do have a method by which we can leverage federal funds for getting those cameras by way of special education funding. And so we are working through that process to make that happen. It's cumbersome and it's not ideal, but we believe we can make that work, which is why it's not compromised. We're just gonna go a different route to still meet that need. So we are not above being creative and pushing our parameters to their max to flex policy and stay out of jail.
We also have to keep in mind that while we do have flat or declining enrollment, our expenses continue to go up. We have contracts that we negotiated, we can't not pay our employees, and 81% of our budget is salaries and benefits. And this district does has some very, very good benefits compared to a lot of our surrounding districts. And those are things that we can't really compromise on. Yeah, there are things that we can not buy, but salaries are, they're in our budget. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jen.
Other board members want to weigh in or have questions as we prioritize this list and consider direction? The other thing we probably want to get some clarification around, which Dr. Thomas touched on at the beginning, is language and a shared understanding of language in terms of the fund balance policy. So, you know, the policy says unassigned and assigned. In the past, Enrique, I'm going to need some guidance here, but I believe that we've worked from a place of unassigned.
That's right. In the past, we've primarily focused on the unassigned fund balance and kept that between 8 and 12%, although policy states that it should be combined, assigned and assigned.
And I'm not recommending, or, I mean, I think the board should weigh in, and I don't want to misguide anybody, but that has been our practice in the past. I know it's also been it is practiced and called out in policy in other districts that it's just unassigned. So I just want to open that up for us to create a shared understanding of what we want to work towards.
And I can tell you the unassigned is, well, there's 4 categories. You have the restricted, which you can't basically spend on anything other than what the dollars were intended for. So for instance, there is funding sources in legislature like gifted and talented that you can only spend on gifted and talented. So if you don't spend all of the revenue that you get, you have to put it in a restricted fund balance because you can only use it for gifted and talented. So it's very restricted. The unassigned or the assigned fund balance is things that as a district you make decisions on how you want to use some of that fund balance. So one of the things that we typically always include in our assigned is site, our school carryover dollars. So if they have a fundraiser and they generate funds, that's dollars that they have kind of generated for their building. And if they don't spend it all, we will put it into an assigned fund balance because obviously they've generated the revenue. We don't want to spend it on anything other than whatever it was they generated the revenue for. We've put things like class size reduction. So if we end up getting a lot of students between the time that we approve the budget and the beginning of school, then we have a source that we can pull from immediately to hire new staff for those additional students. So that would be an assigned fund balance. So it's very specific things that you choose to spend those dollars on, and you assign it whatever category you're going to. The unassigned is totally flexible. You can do whatever the district decides to do, and typically those are the dollars that most districts will talk about as in their fund balance policy. Ours says both, so try to make it a point every time we have this conversation that we break out the assigned and unassigned and then what the combined is. Because our policy does say assigned and unassigned.
And ours is 8 to 12. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that in other districts, when they only classify assigned, it's typically a bit lower.
Yes.
Well, not a lot, but like Edina, I believe, is 6 to 10. Lakeville, I know, is lower than us.
Yeah,
the
5
only
to
assigned.
10 is,
And I'm not saying that we need to change the policy, but I think we need to make sure we have a shared understanding for where we want to work within our policy.
Right.
Does it make it more confusing to have them come together for everyone? Like, not only for the community, but does it also make it more confusing on you? So does that mean we do need to relook at that policy?
I think that we can ask policy committee to do that, but for tonight,
Right.
and as we move forward with this budget, I think we want to, like I said, create a shared understanding for that language.
Yeah, when we speak, the policy currently talks about it being combined. And so I want to be very clear, we're aligning and leading within policy. Policy is 8 to 12 for the total fund balance. I don't know the exact verbiage, but both assigned and unassigned. And we have been also speaking in terms of unassigned specifically, just because of how Tammy framed it. There's no restrictions. It's like truly accessible. Not that this assigned isn't accessible, but it's only accessible for that specific cause. And so that has been somewhat confusing for some emails that I get about, well, why can't you just use XYZ dollars? Well, that's because it's in the assigned portion of the total fund balance, and we don't have access to use that for said request. We will make sure we're speaking to policy language. We're not trying to speak against policy. Total fund balance is total fund balance. When we talk about accessing funds, we are just making sure we are disaggregating that so you all and our community knows where we would be pulling that from, so you know the source. It's coming from fund balance, and we are within the regulations of fund balance that we're using it however we need to for unassigned, and or if we're using assigned balance, we are letting the board and the community know we're using it for its intended purpose. So you all know we're on the up and up with that. I don't know if that.
Is that different than what Enrique said though? Or am I?
No, it's not.
And
I'm
it's
sorry,
just
Director
explaining, like-
Velasquez, I apologize.
No, it's all
That
right.
was
Work
not-
sessions are more okay.
Yeah, that's
No.
my take too.
No.
But it's that we've practiced a more conservative approach. Procedurally in practice, what we've done in the past is practice to only the unassigned.
Because I was looking at the community budget guide that was developed, and that's actually where I was reading through it, and I believe this community budget guide was developed in December, I think, or approved in December, which I was surprised because it has my picture on it. As a board
No
director.
royalties.
Are you trying to say you inherited it?
I inherited this, yes. I was like, wow, my picture's on here. Anyway, but there's a, slide number 23, talks about, specifically about the assigned and unassigned. And then there's a little graph that shows that we view it exactly how policy reads. That we strive to maintain a minimum total unassigned and assigned general fund balance of 8 to 12%. And that's how it's on here. So is that what we're gonna be doing going forward?
We always
as
have.
well? Oh, okay.
We've not.
Okay, because you
deviated.
separated it out, that's why I didn't know. And I
well,
think
we're
that's
going
what
to talk
confusion.
about it separately because it's two very distinct different purposes.
Okay, I understand. Mhm.
But when we show the.
That's
all
our
of the-
policy, so, yeah.
Right, it's going to be together.
So basically, they're both combined to fall according according to policy, is what
Right, but in practice, I would just say, as a board, we've taken a little more conservative approach, which is right. I mean, would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah, we've generally only focused on just the unassigned, because we can't do anything with the assigned, it's already
Other than.
earmarked for
It's earmarked, yeah.
specific purposes.
Well, I understand that. That's different than what the policy says, though.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a drill down, you know, it would be a more,
But it's a big number. So,
right,
and a big difference, if you're looking at the assigned and the unassigned versus the total of the assigned and unassigned. Those are two very different numbers. And I think that's where the confusion has come in, correct?
Well, it's combined as maybe a bigger number than using them each separately. But again, the assigned you can't use for anything other than what it was assigned for. So while on this example, the unassigned is 10.4 and the assigned is 6.3, combined with 16.7. So that's a big number.
Mm-hmm.
But the assigned, we can't use for anything other than what it was assigned for.
Tammy, would an example of that be like, you know, like we get at board meetings where people give gifts, like monetary gifts, and they say like, I want this to, I'm giving a $10,000 donation, but I want it to be used for this. So that would go into our assigned.
That would be a little bit different because you would designate it as a spend for that year. I mean, if you don't spend it that year, then yes, it would be an assigned fund balance at the end of the year if you don't spend it all.
And then
So
you
it's gotta
mentioned,
follow the revenue stream.
yeah, and then you mentioned, when you were talking about assigned, you mentioned like site carryover dollars, and you said like from a fundraiser or something. Can you give an example?
Yeah, so if a school, sold magazines
Okay.
because they wanted to fund
Gym equipment.
gym equipment,
Okay.
then if they didn't buy the gym equipment that year, then we don't want to say, well, now it's in our unassigned fund balance. It was money that they raised for a specific purpose, so we're gonna put it into an assigned fund balance.
Or bought it, but didn't have to spend as much, and they have
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
left over. You
You
still have to
still
use
have,
that.
you still
for
have to,
this,
yeah, you
right?
can't move that out. Correct.
Thank you.
So I think we're, I'm sorry. go
Well,
ahead.
so I understand what you're saying. I'm just gonna go back to the slide though, slide 23 in this presentation, and it does say at the end of here, it says, the school board has formally adopted a fund policy regarding maintaining a minimum fund balance for the general fund. The policy states the district will strive to maintain a minimum total unassigned and assigned general fund balance of 8 to 12% of the annual budget, 4 to 6 weeks of operating expenses. Deviation from the fund balance will be reviewed and addressed by the school board. At June 30th, 2022, the total assigned and unassigned fund balance of the general fund was 17.3%. So it's addressed what the two are combined in this slide.
Yeah, we,
Because that's
Yeah.
what
we're well
policy
above,
says.
yeah, kind of unexpectedly
that's-
because of the staff.
Yeah, and that's kind of, that's where we're at now, so.
yeah, I think we're saying the same thing,
Yeah.
folks. I just want to be clear. The only reason we disaggregate it is to really speak to the intent of each bucket. We are never saying unassigned isn't part of the total fund balance. It is. It's 1/2 of it, essentially. So again, if disaggregating it is causing confusion, we can look at how that language is stated, but we want to make sure we're clear that we're in alignment with the total fund balance. We can't spend more than what's in there, totally. And two, if we are using fund balance, the board should know that we're using it appropriately, that our assigned is only being used for what it's assigned for. So if it's a fundraiser for Laola, we're not using that money to buy new art carts, right? We can't do that. That would be illegal. We can only use it for gym equipment at Laola. And if we are using unrestricted funds, unassigned fund balance to buy the art carts, that's legit. And so we're trying to bring a level of clarity and transparency to how we're using those buckets, but they're all one bucket in total fund balance. So,
And as we
okay.
and as we look out ahead, we're still well within, no matter, we're above actually,
Mhm.
you know,
3.4.
with the 3.8, if that's what we decide, or 3.9, I'll round up, you know.
And I
We're
think once we know what the mandates are,
Right.
that will give us a clearer picture of the total
Which,
picture.
you know, in an
Which
ideal
is-
world,
yeah.
they keep coming off, you know,
Yeah.
as they are. And again, I always go for the worst in my head, and so I'm ready for it, but I don't want to speak it out loud and jinx it. But the direction is a good direction, that they're not putting all these unfunded mandates into legislation.
Then I would just say we've talked over and over, I've heard the word of the slowing birth rate. And so knowing that as we put positions in place, declining enrollment with a slowing birth rate is like, we're not gonna have this huge surge. So as we add positions, and we continue to fund those positions in the next 3 to 5 years, with a slowing birth rate, my concern is enrollment.
And if I could speak to that, I share some of that, and I would add that it's no longer just the birth rates in your attendance zone, it's an open market. And we are seeing more and more districts using open enrollment as a strategy because we are essentially moving kids around. Like you said, with the birth rates being slow, it's not new babies all over the place. Certainly that's a factor that's slowing down. But you have, you know, a district at least and others who they're open only because of their ability to pull from every district around them and then some. So the free market is alive and well in K-12, and we're vying for the same kids in every district. So it's who is going to have, you know, going back to the Morris-Leatherman survey, who is going to have the competitive edge to meet the needs because that's the open enrollment data right there. That's the market right there. It's speaking. I need these 3 things, top 3 things, or whatever, you know. And if we don't have it and the neighboring district does, that's who wins that game. So it's shifting. Some of the market is shifting, and our response to the market needs to be different because our traditional methodology isn't going to play out.
If I can make a comment, when you're speaking, the thing that comes to my mind is our decreasing academic achievement over since I think 2016 maybe, 2017 maybe, when it started to decrease prior to the pandemic. And I know that in many surveys, probably in our district and outside of the district, just even, you know, a constant, I think a constant across party lines and across all the lines is the desire for high academic achievement. And so my thought is that any way, and I know that we are focusing on that, any way we can bring those numbers up at a rapid rate will be the advertising. It will speak loudly.
It speaks for itself. So yeah, I would say that's it. That's part of that conversation for sure. To your point, and I just pose this for a thought for the board, more rhetorically. Since 2016, and maybe we can even go further back, this state has seen all over a decrease in academic achievement as a state. Like that has, and not just Minnesota, all states have been seeing this continual decline of academic achievement. And it begs to question how we are measuring achievement. I'll just plant that out there. And then when you make it about Minnesota, with the level of, I'm going to be careful that you don't hear this, because I'm not trying to say this. I'm advocating for high academic achievement. And I question, how can our academic achievement as a state and many others be marginal, however you want to characterize it, yet still have some of the highest college going rates and graduates in Minnesota, right? There's a disconnect somewhere. Because if that many kids were that bad academically, how can that statistic exist? So it's just a wondering I have. And are we measuring effectively the ability for a student to demonstrate mastery of competencies that's preparing them for college, career, and life readiness? So it is a wondering I have, because that hasn't really slowed anywhere in the country. Yet we still see these results coming up into higher ed. And now we're starting to see that coming flat, which is largely driven by dollars and tuition costs.
When given the loss of learning experience through COVID and the, challenges with, literacy, what's the effect going to be when those students are graduating? And that's something to err to caution as well. How will that ripple effect carry throughout their academic careers?
Yeah, I do think the READ Act is going to really help with that, to ensure that we are getting teaching of literacy by 3 by licensed and highly trained staff in K-3 is going to be a significant push to bolster that. And many states are adopting READ Acts. That's a hyper focus around the country. And we're not any different than that. And to provide the training and everything like that, so all of our teachers are, reading teachers, at least in K-3. Sorry.
And Dr. Thomas, I agree with what Director Bullion says, is I don't think we've yet seen the impact as these kids are going into college, because a lot of them who are not meeting the 3rd grade reading levels, we're going to see what that happens in the next, 10 to 12 years.
But that's happened pre-COVID. Those cohorts, many cohorts of kids have not. Minnesota has had some of the biggest gaps in the country, and like many states, have had low standardized state assessment scores for many years pre-COVID. And we haven't seen that bust yet in higher ed, in terms of their ability to go in and perform and graduate and still bolster higher ed graduates here in the state of Minnesota. I do believe both of your points are well taken, that we now have a new cohort that's going to come in who has been subjected to some really significant learning challenges, that, yes, that cohort is yet to be seen. But prior to that cohort, there's many others who have gone through the same system, and Minnesota, again, like every other state, has gone through its whole iteration of how we're assessing learner profiles, things of that nature. It has changed about every 10 years. No Child Left Behind was the next iteration of that. I mean, everybody's looking for how are we assessing kids. And I think that's just something to put out there. Are we truly measuring their ability to be ready for college with our current measures? Do MCAs really predict the future success of kids?
Well, and Dr. Thomas, is college the end-all be-all?
And that's why I say college, career, and life readiness.
I think we really, truly need, and I'm happy that we have our trades program in our MidCats program. But I think that, the education, we talked about this at the MSBA conference in January, is that how kids learn. They learn differently post-COVID.
Very.
And what they're necessarily going into is not necessarily going
a traditional
for a traditional
path.
4-year degree, right? So,
college, career, and life readiness, you will always hear me say, because there's going to be multiple pathways to success, however that's defined for our kids and our families.
Right.
So just if I may ask, where you all as a board, given the new information that we've shared with you this evening, What is the desire of the board in terms of direction that you want of us as a senior team? Again, our plan is to come to you with a preliminary budget. If that's something the board wants to shift in terms of its readiness to receive that, and you want us to do something different, I would need to know that. Otherwise, we'll go back with some tweaking. But I've heard one board member talk about another pass. Just trying to get a sense of the will of the board in terms of directional guidance that you would like us to take.
One bit of information that I mentioned, just understanding the staffing.
And I got that noted, yep.
Just having that, I think that'll just help. I understand as a director, and there's a big difference from seeing what's actually happening in the schools from sitting here. Being a staff at one time myself, and feeling that,
Sure.
hey, I just felt like there was a disconnect. There is, in me, a hesitation, I think having that bit of information, how the staffing looks compared from from this year going forward, given the fact that enrollment is projected to decrease, I think that will be helpful in making suggestions going forward, at least for me. I think it's pleasing to see that you found a way to cut half, from what you originally brought forward. I know those, you're talking about this is needs, good things and good things. So I'm curious, like when you say the direction you're seeking, like how do you want us to articulate that to you?
Well, this is the direction that we're going, is to continue to, in this pathway, to bring this forward to you as our preliminary budget. If you want something different, we would need to know that. If that's the will of the board, and if I may, just, Director Atkinson said, is there a way that you can find another $1 million? I know that was just a number thrown out there, but is that the will of the board? And if that is, then we understand the direction that you want us to go. If the will of the board is to see this through and coming through, and we're gonna obviously watch and monitor between now and June 12th before the final vote of a budget comes into play. And as I have been doing, I envision, in advance, that we might request additional times with the board outside of our normal scheduled cadence. It's a little hard doing budget when you only have the couple of meetings. So if the board is also okay with that, I guess I'm asking, are you open to that, knowing that you plan your life around every other Monday, but there might be some of you, at least if we have a quorum, and our invite stands for those of you who want to walk through the budget and suggest some specific ideas that or wonderings that you might know of, and say, hey, I'm aware of this particular program. Is that an area, because you're looking objectively, you're not close to it like we might be close to it, things of that nature. So we've certainly met with a couple of you, 2x2 or 1x1s. That always will stand between now and June 12th as well. So I want to make sure that's on the table. So are you okay with us? I'll start with the easy one. Are you okay with us requesting additional board work sessions between now and June 12th on those Mondays for time to engage with the board? Is that a direction that you're okay with?
I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Okay, got
I
it.
think it's helpful.
And then I guess the companion piece is not really a request, it's more of an offer that we'll continue to do the 2x2s or 1x1s as you need. So that's just always standing there. And then I guess the last point of direction that I'm seeking from the board is our current proposal in terms of what we believe is a direction we would like to go. Is this a direction that the board can support, or is the board wanting something different than what we've currently shared with you this evening? And again, just for a point, there's an ask for a certain dollar amount to possibly be reviewed. And I will say this, folks, that was actually an ask of the senior team when they came to me, because I'm gonna tell you, it was a real tough, intense conversation with the senior team. And it got to the point to say, Michael, it's easier for us to work towards a dollar figure because everything is so nuanced. And so I guess I would ask that of you, because I think that was really helpful for the team. If there is a target that you're more comfortable with, then that would be good to know, and we could find conversation space to see if that's realistic for us to be able to do without having significant second and third order effects.
One thing, oh, I'm sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
I'll remember. Okay. I guess what I'm struggling, and I defer to the will of the board, of course, but I'm struggling with taking the emergency preparedness bucket and putting that on hold, and taking technology upgrades, putting those on hold. And I realize those are very large buckets of money. Maybe to your point, Dr. Thomas, like, I'd be making it up if I said, can we get it to this number? I don't feel like I can do that. And I also understand that's probably not very helpful. But I'm struggling with those two buckets being put on hold.
Well, if I may speak to that.
Yes.
And as you heard Jim speak, we will not be compromising safety by postponing the work that was in the initial proposal to the board, minus the camera system, which we have found, again, a different procedural way to make that happen. That's still legal and will be fine to do. That is the one thing that was really important to the team, and we have found a way to problem solve for that. The technology is one that, in talking with Marcus, we are looking into using carryover restricted funds that he may not spend out of this year's departmental budget, that we can restrict specifically for IT use. And that would be allowable for us to be able to cover that. And that's something that he and Tammy are working to see if they can solve. If we cannot, the impact, where's Marcus? Is Marcus back here still? Marcus is back here. Do you want to just reiterate the impact, if you may? Again, he articulated this a couple weeks ago about the generational platform that we're currently on and what it would take to postpone.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. So, I want to dovetail off a point that Atkinson made about efficiencies. So, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that we have different types of iPad models, and one of the asks was to go with a 9th gen iPad for 6th grade and next year's seniors. Without doing that and delaying that, that will, in my mind, create an inefficiency, because 9th gen iPads will only be available for so long, and then 10th gen, and I spoke to this at the last meeting, 10th gen will be out, different device type, different casing, different, it's missing the headphone jack, runs on different processors. So having, instead of trying to eliminate the 5th and 6th gens and being tighter on the device type offerings, we'd actually, kicked that can down the road and went to this for a year or two. Now we have 3 device types out there. And to the point that's being made tonight, we're constantly looking for efficiencies. We do it within our software. We have a process called SMAR. It's an acronym that we use. It's sunset, migrate, add, and review. So we're constantly looking at our software offerings and seeing what we can sunset, what we can migrate, what we can add, what needs to be on the review cycle. So we are doing that on an annual basis. We're in the support role, and the older tech gets, the more support it needs. That creates inefficiencies as well. So these are needs, I want to be very clear on that. Their needs. We will review every possible way that we can to address these needs moving forward, whether it's, and to Dr. Thomas's point, carryover. We leverage E-rate when we can to reduce costs, but E-rate has its own rules and restrictions, and not everything can be E-rateable. So we E-rate what we can.
Can you
So,
explain what E-rate is?
yeah, E-rate's a federal program, and it helps schools and libraries get reduced or discounted costs for internet, telephone access, and they have, that's category 1. They have something called category 2, which is things like firewalls and infrastructure equipment or access points. And for this year, we applied for E-rate category 1, telephone, internet, and also category 2, which is our firewall. So firewalls can be very expensive, but if it's a qualifying expenditure and we get that award, it'll be at a discounted rate. So we are looking for ways to save dollars. We are looking for efficiencies constantly. But as equipment ages, it becomes less efficient. For not only to run and support our student achievement and learning, but also to support from my team standpoint.
Question on the E-rate, is that a situation where you have to apply for reimbursement after you make the purchase for the expenditure?
Yeah, you can do it, 2 ways. You can, there's a bear form or an SPI form. You can pay the full amount, you get the discounted amount in the form of a check. Or they can, depending on the vendor, E-rate can do SPI, which they invoice. If it's like a monthly service, they can invoice the vendor directly. So you can, either way. And I always check with the business office to see how they want, if we get an E-rate award, how do you want that? Do you want it in the bear form or do you want it in SPI? And, you know, for budgeting purposes, it varies.
Ultimately, there's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee?
Right.
We
might have to encumber that expense and then hopefully recover
Yeah.
a portion or all of it.
Yeah. So it's a very lengthy process, but we have a consultant we work with, and it's also our way to do a request for a proposal. That Form 470 that I've referenced in the past, that is our request for proposals on a lot of these services, so.
Mr. Milazzo, I have a question.
Yes.
I know I've asked for this before for all of the areas, but what is your total budget?
It's roughly like 3.6 million.
3.6.
That's off the top of my head. I'd have to, for revised, I believe that's, Tammy's giving me a, so.
3.6 million,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's what I was trying to get an idea of how much of an increase this is to your current budget. And how does that compare to the other areas? And I know that's something that we talked about. I'd still love to see that for each of the departments. And I appreciate you looking at ways to try to cycle those iPads, because the feedback that I've received is the kinders don't use them a lot, the first graders don't use them a lot,
Yep.
same as the second graders. So, you know, I understand technology changes. I understand it's important. I also see what my children do to their iPads, and I won't comment on that.
Okay. Other questions for me? Thank you.
It's okay. I think I do. You had said, as far as direction, a number would be helpful. Given what Director Velasquez shared when in past using unassigned, typically just us using, as a district, using the unassigned as our benchmark or what we,
Yeah, we focused more on the unassigned because it's the larger
because
of
it's,
the two
and
numbers.
it's flexible. Well, the unassigned, or, okay. Yes, because it's the larger of the two. I think I just answered my question, because when I'm looking at, you know, even after the budget shortfall and looking at what we're projected, that the unassigned would remain at 12 million and the assigned would dip to 3.4. You know, if we, or 3%. If we wanted to, I I just feel like if our policy states between 8 and 12%, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
The two combined, Director Bullion.
Correct.
And we feel confident with being, above that, given this shortfall. We're still waiting for legislation to come through, which makes things gray and a little bit more nerve-wracking.
With the amount of legislation coming through, we would also, again, project. Oh, you got numbers on?
No, I'm just calculating. I like my old-fashioned calculator.
Oh, yeah, so she got Kennedy working over there.
It's all right, it's what I do for a living,
Yeah,
so.
no, but, I mean, yeah.
Calculate percentages all day
generally,
long.
The fund balance, total fund balance, if some of the legislation that's remaining were to pass through,
We'd
range.
still be, so right now, even if we took the 3.8, we're gonna have 13.4%, so we're still over. So we have some flexibility in there. The thing that I think we just have to keep in mind is fund balance is one-time money. Once you spend it, it's done. So if we in fact do get some legislative mandates that come through with no funding, then we'll be fine for next year, but the 24, 25, we would have to make some other decisions.
Yeah. That's the hard part.
So the strategy, I mean, again, just from a business standpoint, we're looking for a wise investment strategy that's gonna bolster our enrollment. That's how we generate additional dollars without having to go back to our community for anything, in the future. I mean, that's a key for us. So how can we make a wise investment that's going to get us the greatest return equating to enrollment? And there's a variety of ways we can do it. It's everything from achievement scores, it's to programmatic offerings, it's to how you even tell your story, Those districts who can sell their district irrespective of, again, when you look at our district, we vie in the top districts in the metro. I mean, our experiences, our graduation rates, our variety of metrics, we're in, a pack of districts that are touted as and known for to be great districts. How do we tell our story in a way that also promotes that, fosters that? And we heard Emily over the past several months talking about our number one recruitment strategy is word of mouth, is our people, And we heard from Morris Leatherman, word of mouth is how folks are getting their news. And so if parents are out there, beating the streets of, hey, PLSAS is the place to be, that's worth its weight in gold, And so again, I think from our ability to market, that's part of a strategy. And again, you saw that pulled off this list because we have a superintendent board budget that we're gonna use for that purpose and not go into a separate, which means we're gonna reduce, folks to work with us or, board trainings and all that kind of stuff. And we're gonna put it into more of the marketing approach. So those are some of the things that we're shifting for efficiencies too.
Dr. Thomas, I guess I would just, my final comments would be, I'd like to see a balanced budget without a shortfall. And I think it does come back to the things that you said. I kind of wrote down the three C's in my word when we're looking at the Morris Leatherman survey and the other surveys. It's community engagement. How do we get our community back engaged in our district? It's culture and it's class size. And so those are all the things that we need to keep in mind. But I would personally like to see us present a budget with the mandates that are coming down as soon as we hear them, as soon as we learn of them, to add them into the budget so that we're aware of them and we see how it impacts the budget. And then I'd like to see, I don't want to see a budget shortfall. I'd like to see a balanced budget. would be my desire. That's not the rule.
I think we're in a unique position relative to our peers. You know, we have a lot of school districts around us that are making massive cuts at a time when kids need a lot, and our staff is telling us they need a lot. And so I think we're in a unique position that we can actually do some of it. And I do think you're right. I think that will attract students and families. So, I mean, if we were to pass a balanced budget where your increased needs are zero, we would be out of policy big time. You know, we'd be way, way above, which is never really a problem. But I mean, I think that supports the idea that we're primed to do some really good things for our district, and we have the opportunity to do that this year immediately and feel immediate impact, and I think it will attract kids to our district. Longer term, we're gonna have to, we don't want to get ourselves in a bad situation, and I don't think this board wants that at all. But I think we're sitting pretty healthy, and I think looking at a plan that we have today that puts us at either 10.4% or over our 12% is a pretty careful consideration, especially because we're not making a final decision today. We have some time to understand what the legislature is going to do. So I'm comfortable with this. That's just where I'm sitting right now.
I'm fairly comfortable with the budget as it's presented right now as well. But also recognizing that what's presented is also attainable. We're making the investments in key areas to provide the necessary supports, provide the necessary resources, because we recognize that not all students come in with the exact same needs. We need to build in the infrastructure, we need to build in the support so that our students have those opportunities to learn, and so that those families can see that this is a district that is making the investments in community. So it's investing now on the hope and the promise that more will come and will be attracted to our district. We recognize that our fund balance, well, it is spending. So as we go into some of the out years, year 2, beyond this, we'll start to see some of those impacts or those benefits as a result of the investments we're making.
I think I'm challenged, with a desire for a balanced budget. That just seems fiscally responsible, right? To say we want to see a balanced budget. What I'm challenged to, and I know we've talked about it, it's not like it's not a complete lack of understanding, but if we go ahead with what is presented and our fund balance remains above what our policy states that it needs to be at, correct? But we're still waiting on 3 points, so it actually could possibly go below. I think that unknown, it makes it I'm very challenged to say, go forward as you state, while I am listening to all the senior leadership say these are strong needs in our district, the deans in particular, the counselors. For me, understanding, if we say go ahead with what is proposed here tonight, and we receive some of the answers as far as what's being pushed through, and we can assign those, is there leeway to make any changes going forward then? And I know that time, that, I know that, or I can only imagine that lessening that time frame makes it more challenging for you to do the work.
The short answer is yes. And I think the long answer is where you just ended. It does make it challenging to plan. So, this is why, I get the tension between the budgeting process and timeline, how we're planning a year that has yet to cross the finish line in terms of so many unknowns. I understand that tension. That's not something any of us can control here locally. But what I will share is that, yes, anything between now and June 12th can be revised. Nothing is final until you take the vote on June 12th. But planning is underway, and any potential hiring is underway, and those kind of things, because folks are making commitments to where they're going to be securing jobs and where we're going to be building a program. And so if we build it and kids have registered, et cetera, and we're going to say, no, we're going to pull that back, and now we're going back to redoing master schedules and things of that nature because that program is no longer going to be offered. So those are the consequences of major shifts between now and June 12th.
Well, the other challenge is some of these positions are not yet filled. So am I correct in saying that? Like some of the positions are not yet filled, so it's a hypothetical.
So yeah, in the market that Emily laid out, yes, we are all vying for the same limited pool of staff, and not all positions for next year, irrespective of even any of the newer investments, are necessarily filled.
That is accurate, but I will say that a lot of effort and a lot of energy has been going into recruiting and working to hire all these positions. So there has been a lot of work that has been being done because of what we shared a couple months ago, that there's a lot of districts that do this in February. Right. So a lot of these very challenging positions to fill throughout the school year, we were able to move that up to March and go to that job fair, which was extremely helpful. So we have been doing a lot of the work already. And when I say we, a lot of the school administration, district administration has been boots on the ground recruiting and trying to hire for these positions.
Emily, is it possible, like, the next time we have this budget conversation, that we can get a clear understanding of which of these positions have been filled as you've been working on them? Because then we can say the 3 deans is no longer 3, it's 2. We've already filled 1. Oh, I guess we would know, because don't we vote on those positions as well? We vote on them at the board table? They come to the board table. Okay, sorry, yeah.
No, that's a good call out.
So we would know if these positions.
But yeah, that, and there's a lot that comes to the board, so that we can, just specific to this list, kind of a check of where are we at with this.
And I have just one question about this list with the differentiation specialist. Is that just one position or is it 2? It says 1.
Actually, it's multiples.
It's multiples, okay,
We're splitting that among different campuses.
Okay.
So that would allow us to get a 0.5 differentiated specialist.
In how many buildings?
4 of our schools, correct?
So we would be, if we only went with the 1.0.
2 of our schools, sorry.
Yeah, we would be short, and we'd have to figure out how to, if that was the amount, because the original 1.5 was to have somebody at a halftime person at each building K-8. But cut that back, we would now not have all, so 9 schools, we would not have all 9 schools covered, but we wouldn't just not cover one school, so we would shuffle accordingly.
They would have 2 or 3 assignments.
Multiple, 2 to 3 buildings assigned for the people that we would have.
And like the original synergy model was at 0.5 at every.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. I know this is hard. It's not easy work, but I will say I'm happy that we're not in a position as other districts that are making really hard choices. And so, for all your work. I look forward to furthering having the conversation.
Hard conversations, particularly for the learning leaders as they're advocating for their programs, and they know what their kids and staff are saying. So, I mean, it's easy for us, right? Not easy, but we don't hear those pleas, so.
Well, I will just say that I'm very impressed with this team. They are being asked to be team players in all of this, and they've all stepped up to understand there's competing priorities from every aspect of the organization, and everyone's willing to find ways to be efficient, postpone, etc., in support of one another. So I want to thank the team. And also, again, as a board, and this being my first budget cycle with the district, and a couple of you as board members, this is, again, a great learning process to understand value propositions. It's really important because a lot of that goes into how we do this. I totally understand the challenge before us too, and I hear the desire of a zero balanced budget. We are struggling to get there, and we will certainly, juxtaposed to affecting our potential enrollment, and I know these are calculated investments that we have to consider. So again, that's why I was asking, again, I want to be very clear, like a couple months ago, whatever it was, like, what is the will of the board ultimately, because we are putting forth where we are at, and we will continue in a direction per, the board. You govern the budget and where you're wanting to see things. And I've got some takeaways for when we come back to you all next week as well. And that is our total projected enrollment or staffing year-over-year change. I heard a board member talk about coming, a balanced budget in 3 C's, purchases, and looking at ways that we can skinny up things that we have committed as expenditures, and then which positions are yet to be filled or yet to be filled, I guess both. I mean, those are things I'm hearing as some takeaways for us as a team.
And I'd still like to see, I'd still like to see by department where those increases are by
Yeah, we
department.
have.
I think
Yeah,
we talked about
sorry.
that.
That's helpful
Mhm.
for context.
Okay.
All right, any other closing comments? Okay, I think we're adjourned.